Ya makan apa aja?
Telur bulan Pak.
Iya.
Sama udang Pak.
send you stones, go break all of my bones. You won't ache my soul, you can't get to me. And there is no barricade that I can tear away. Shoot me down, but fire away, away. But I'm a heavyweight. I'm a heavyweight. I'm a heavyweight. I'm a push me down to the ground. What goes around comes around. You won't put the flame out, you can't get to me. Say what you wanna say, go take it all away. But I'm here to stay, no you can't get to me. And there is no barricade that I can tear away. Shoot me down, but fire away, away. But I'm a heavyweight. I'm a heavyweight. I'm a heavyweight. I'm a heavyweight.
into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe it's true, baby, won't you let the light shine through for you, for you, for you, for into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe it's true, baby, won't you let the light shine through for you, for you, for you, for you, for you.
setengah mati kepadamu. Sungguh ku ingin kau tahu, aku rindu setengah mati. Meski telah lama kita tak bertemu, ku selalu memimpikan kamu. Ku tak bisa hidup tanpamu. Aku rindu setengah mati kepadamu. Sungguh ku ingin kau tahu, aku rindu setengah mati. Aku rindu setengah mati kepadamu. Sungguh ku ingin kau tahu, aku rindu setengah mati. Aku rindu. Ku tak bahagia melihat kau bahagia dengannya. Aku terluka, tak bisa dapatkan kau sepenuhnya. Aku terluka melihat kau bermesraan dengannya. Ku tak bahagia melihat kau bahagia. Harusnya aku yang di sana dampingimu dan bukan dia. Harusnya aku yang kau cinta dan bukan dia. Harusnya kau tahu bahwa cintaku lebih darinya. Harusnya yang kau pilih bukan dia. Ku tak bahagia melihat kau bahagia dengannya. Ku tak bahagia melihat kau bahagia. Saatnya ku berkata, mungkin yang terakhir kalinya. Sudahlah, lepaskan semua. Ku yakin inilah waktunya. Mungkin saja kau bukan yang dulu lagi. Mungkin saja rasa itu telah pergi. Dan mungkin bila nanti kita akan bertemu lagi, satu pintaku jangan kau coba tanyakan kembali. Rasa yang ku tinggal mati seperti hari kemarin saat semua di sini. Dan bila hatimu termenung, bangun dari mimpi-mimpimu, membuka hatimu yang dulu, cerita saat bersamaku. Mungkin saja kau bukan yang dulu lagi. Mungkin saja rasa itu telah pergi. Dan mungkin bila
Welcome Abah, welcome Abadian, welcome.
nanti kita akan bertemu lagi, satu pintaku jangan kau coba tanyakan kembali. Rasa yang ku tinggal mati seperti hari kemarin saat semua di sini. Tak usah kau tanyakan lagi, simpan untukmu sendiri semua sesal yang kau cari, semua
Abah lagi di rumah?
Pejamkan mata ini, mencoba untuk melupakan segala kenangan indah tentang dirimu, tentang mimpiku. Semakin aku mencoba, bayangmu semakin nyata, merasuk hingga ke jiwa. Tuhan tolonglah diriku, entah di mana dirimu berada. Hampa terasa hidupku tanpa dirimu. Apakah Satu-satunya yang bisa membuat jiwaku yang pernah mati menjadi berarti. Namun kini kau menghilang bagaikan di telan bumi. Tak pernahkah kau sadari arti
One, two, three. Oceans apart, day after day, and I slowly go insane. I hear your voice on the line, but it doesn't stop the pain. If I see you next to never, how can we say forever? Wherever you go, whatever you do, I will be right here waiting for you. Whatever it takes, or how my heart breaks, I will be right here waiting for you. I took for granted all the time that I thought would last somehow. I hear the laughter, I taste the tears, but I can't get near you now. Oh, can't you see it, baby? You got me going crazy. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I will be right here waiting for you. Whatever it takes, or how my heart breaks, I will be right here waiting for you. I wonder how we can survive this romance, but in the end, if I'm with you, I'll take the chance. Oh, yeah. And oh, can't you see it, baby? You got me going crazy. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I will be right here waiting for you. Whatever it takes, how my heart breaks, I will be right here waiting for you. Tell me about the good old days. Sometimes it feels like this one's gone crazy. And Grandpa, take me back to yesterday, when the line between right and wrong didn't seem so hazy. Did lovers really fall in love to stay? Stand beside each other, come when they. Was the promise really something people kept? Not just something they would say and then forget. Did families really bow their heads to pray? Did daddies really never go away? Oh, 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 Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Oh, 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 oh. And Grandpa, everything is changing fast. We call it progress, but I just don't know. No, no. Oh, and Grandpa, let's wander back into the past and paint me a picture of long ago. Did lovers really fall in love to stay? Stand beside each other, come when they. Was a promise really something people kept? Not just something they would say and then forget. Did families really bow their heads to pray? Did daddies really never go away? Oh, 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 Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Did lovers really fall in love to stay? Stand beside each other, come when they. Was a promise really something people kept? Not just something they would say and then forget. Did families really bow their heads to pray? Did daddies really never go away? Oh, 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 Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Oh, oh, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Oh, 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 tell me about the good old days.
After the 2016 election, what's the situation like now? How are relations between Russia and the US at the moment?
Well, good morning, Rosie. Actually, this time round we heard claims that Moscow had also tried to meddle and obtain US voter information and taken actions to influence public opinion in the US, that Russia has hacked into state local computer networks to access to American voting infrastructure. And according to some US officials, Russia intended to help Donald Trump potentially by provoking disputes around the results if the race is too close to call. But Russia says that it is not supporting anyone and that the relations between the US and Russia are really, really bad, and in any outcome of these elections can't be worse. And the Kremlin says that any allegations are just groundless and they are just an easy electoral tool, that Russia is not so powerful to influence the vote in such a big country as the United States. The chairman of the International Committee of Russia's Upper House of Parliament, Konstantin Kosachev, this morning wrote on Facebook that Russia is interested in stable politics in the United States, so it would not need any Russia's meddling pretext, and that in today, after we know the result of the world, the benefit of Russia would be some stable result where the loser would not need to point its finger on Russia.
What does Russia want from the election, Galina? Is a Trump victory really, particularly for the Kremlin, the best outcome for them?
Well, actually, according to some analysts, Rosie, Vladimir Putin and Russian political elite might still prefer Donald Trump because, let's say, he corresponds with their view of the world which moves away from multilateralism towards sovereignty, that the two men, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, actually share this skepticism of international bodies. We know that Vladimir Putin said that he would work with anyone who wins, and that's what Russia has been constantly saying, trying to pretend that it does not prefer anyone during those elections. But Mr. Putin noted Biden's history of sharp anti-Russian rhetoric and contrasted it with Trump's desire for better ties with Moscow. And of course, Joe Biden would truly want to restore American leadership on the international arena and to bring multilateralism back as a key element into the US foreign policy.
Galina, thank you very much, our correspondent there in Moscow. Now, Scott Lucas is a professor of US politics at the University of Birmingham and co-founder of America Unfiltered project. He joins us now from the UK. Thank you very much for speaking to us. An exciting evening so far. Where do you see the relationship then between the US and the EU going forward?
We don't know, because we don't know who is going to be the leader of the United States. And we may not know that. We certainly won't know it for a few days. We may not know it for weeks or even months.
What do you think the difference will be, though, if we have Donald Trump to stay in power and become president again for 4 more years? Or how would that look very differently than if Joe Biden's in the White House?
Oh, very simple. And that is, you get predictability. You get Joe Biden, who plays by the rules of the game. He's done it as a senator. He's done it as a vice president for 8 years, versus a Donald Trump who knows no rules except that which benefits Donald Trump. You know, the most destabilizing thing for diplomacy, as you've been hearing from your guest, is unpredictability and uncertainty. You may not always agree. You may sometimes differ on your interest in issues, but you want to know what the other guy is doing. You want to know he isn't going to basically trick you, deceive you, lie to you. And with Trump, you don't know that. You've seen it with leaders such as Angela Merkel, who you see there on screen. You've seen it with Emmanuel Macron. You've seen it across Europe and across the EU and NATO, which is Trump does not have any interest for the EU-US alliance. Now, with Joe Biden, would things automatically be restored? No, there's a lot of repair work to be done. But the first thing that a Biden administration would do is it would restore the integrity of US agencies. The Pentagon, the CIA, the State Department, the Treasury, because right now, if one of those agencies does something that Donald Trump doesn't like, there's a tweet, there's a public statement, and all of a sudden officials are having to basically scramble to protect themselves against the man in the White House rather than look to dealing with Europe.
If Donald Trump wins, do you think there'll be much of a material change between Washington and the EU?
That depends on how much more chaotic Donald Trump is. I mean, what does he do, for example, with his relationship with Vladimir Putin? And you've just been hearing from your correspondent there. But the fact is that Donald Trump has a different view of what to do with Russia than Europe does, than his own Defense Department does, than his State Department does. What does Donald Trump do with respect to North Korea? Does he suddenly decide to be friends with Kim Jong-un, or does he attack it? What does he do economically? Does he step up his trade wars? In other words, there's no telling how far Donald Trump will go, not for a protectionist policy in the sense of America protecting itself, but Donald Trump protecting, as it were, his personal interest. And let me add just one other thing. Donald Trump owes up to $900 million in loans, more than $400 million in loans, which are due to foreign interest within the next 4 years. So EU leaders cannot even think that they're dealing with a U.S. president who may or may not be financially compromised.
In the last election 4 years ago, Donald Trump was quite robust in his ideas for America and also his international relations as well. Did we see much of that in this time around of campaigning? Do we really know what those staunch points are going to be for him?
Well, no, because even in 2016 and in his leadership, Donald Trump doesn't deal in policy. He doesn't deal in strategy. He deals in slogans. So what does Make America Great mean? Make America Great Again mean? What does it mean when he says that NATO is obsolete? What does he mean when it says Europe is ripping us off? Does that mean there will be U.S. sanctions? Does it mean that America's military alignment will shift? In other words, what you get from Trump, he's really good at one thing, and that is being the snake oil salesman. And he can sell snake oil, but when you sell snake oil, there's no substance to the snake oil. There's just simply people's belief, which is, maybe I'll try some of it.
Just very briefly, Scott, do you think there's a chance that Donald Trump might try and sort of take the agenda of the night into his own hands and declare that he's won before we've actually seen any confirmation of that?
Donald Trump has already signaled he's going to do that. In a tweet which was flagged by Twitter and hidden by Twitter, he accused the Democrats of trying to steal the election. In fact, what Donald Trump is going to do, almost certainly, is try to cut off the counting of the mail-in ballots in the 3 critical states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Because to remain in office, Donald Trump has to win 2 of those 3 states, and his people don't think they can do it. So yes, this will soon be not only the uncertainty that we've seen tonight, but probably one of the greatest constitutional crises that the U.S. has faced, well, in recent memory.
Scott Lucas, thank you very much. Professor of US Politics at the University of Birmingham. Really appreciate your insights. Do stay with us. We'll be keeping up to date here on Euronews, our continuing coverage of the United States presidential election here on Euronews. Well, hello and welcome back to our continuing coverage here on Euronews of the US presidential election. I'm Rosie Wright and let's look at where the story stands. The nail-biting race for the White House. Who will win one of the most bitter contests in a generation? The controversial Republican President Donald Trump is hoping to secure another 4-year term in office. Early indications show he's won the key swing states of Ohio and Florida. Or will Democratic challenger Joe Biden secure enough electoral college votes to lead a new White House administration? He's won safe Democratic seats, but so far failed to make any new gains.
We believe we're on track to win this election.
I'm over with Field Miocic regarding all of the latest results as they come in here to the Euronews Results Centre. As it stands, Joe Biden has 224 electoral college votes. US President Donald Trump has 213.
Counting is continuing in most of the states. A record number of mail-in ballots may yet swing the election in the favour of either candidate.
And here in the Cube, I'll bring you the very latest verified information from social media as tweets by the president are labelled as potentially misleading.
And I'm Ray Suarez, live in Washington, D.C. I'll be assessing the results and what they mean, not just for the United States, but for Europe and the wider world.
It's not just about the White House. Democrats are hoping to gain control of both houses of Congress, but early indications suggest they're failing to make the necessary gains. Well, hello and welcome to our continuing coverage of Euronews on the United States presidential election. We are expecting President Donald Trump to speak from the White House. As soon as he does that, we'll bring it to you. But as it currently stands, Donald Trump has won the key swing states of Florida, Ohio and Iowa. They are the states he won in 2016, and retaining them was seen as critical to his re-election bid. We've got live pictures there of the White House. As soon as the president comes out, we'll bring you that statement. Joe Biden, on the other hand, has picked up states that traditionally vote Democrat. That's such as California and New York. He's not yet, though, made any significant breakthroughs. There are still a number of states in play. Those traditional Republican strongholds such as Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia and even Texas, which could yet determine who will become the next US president. Well, in this very special programme, we've got rolling coverage from you. We're looking at the race for the White House and bringing you insight, analysis and perspective. I'm going to be joined by guests, correspondents and contributors on both sides of the Atlantic as we dissect the results. Look forward to what they mean for the EU, the continent of Europe and the wider world. Well, let's begin our coverage with a reminder of the stories so far and what the map looks like. We can go to speak to Ollie in our results centre as we wait to hear from the president, who should be there. Ollie, just give us the map as it stands. Where's red, where's blue?
So at the moment, Rosie, what we're seeing is that Joe Biden, the Democratic challenger, has got a small lead at the moment, 224 electoral college votes to Donald Trump's 213. Once either candidate reaches 270, that's it. The race is over. They will be declared the next US president once those results are verified. As you were saying, there's been no real upsets for either of the candidates. They've taken the states that usually vote either for the Democrats or for the Republicans. The small exception for the Democrats, they've taken the 2nd congressional district of Nebraska. Here are the Republican results that have come through. You can see Texas, Kentucky, Louisiana, all of those states, usually down in the South, that always vote for the Republicans. But let's take a look at where the battle really is now, and that's Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is worth 20 electoral college votes. There's been so much focus by both of the campaigns here to try and win this. It is seen as crucial. Now, you can have a look here. You can see in 2016 won by 1 percentage point. At the moment, Donald Trump looks like he is 15 percentage points up. But we've got to note that not only in Pennsylvania, not only in Michigan, as well as next door, those 3 states we are not expecting a result from this morning. Michigan there, you can see again Donald Trump is in the lead. If we go on to our next state, it's going to be a similar picture. The problem is these 3 states are not used to all of the early absentee voting, the mail-in voting, and so they've got to have time to count those votes. It's going to be, look here, Wisconsin, it's only 4 percentage points, but all of that could shift because we know that Democratic voters are more likely to vote using those absentee ballots. Then we have a look at North Carolina. Now, the Democrats were hoping that they'd be able to flip this. And at the moment, it's only 1 percentage point in it. 100 precincts reporting there. Now, Arizona is going to be something that the Democrats are really, really targeting now. Joe Biden needs to win here. And as it stands, he has a 6 percentage point increase. Arizona, if he can hold on to that, will yield him 11 electoral college votes. So, it's all to play for at the moment. It is incredibly tight, and the reason it's been so tight is because Florida went to the Republicans. There had been thoughts, murmurings by the analysts and the pollsters that actually this could go to the Democrats, but because of a very, very hard-fought campaign there by the Republicans, Donald Trump has won it. This is the current state of play. As I was saying, not much has changed, but keep an eye over here in Arizona. And for these 3 states up here, we're just going to have to wait for all of that counting to conclude, Rosie.
And those are some of the really critical ones. But the Republicans are going to be feeling quite buoyant by results in Florida. 29 electoral college votes up for grabs there, and it's been a real success for Donald Trump.
It has been a real success because what they did was they've really targeted their message down in the southern part of the state around here. Miami-Dade County, you've got a huge Hispanic vote there, and it's mixed between Cubans, between Latin Americans. It's also got some Venezuelans who are in exile. Donald Trump had door-to-door canvassing. They were selling this message to the electorate that if Joe Biden gets in, it's going to be a return to socialism, which seems to have spooked those voters and really swung this state, the swingiest of states it is often labeled, a state where US President Donald Trump relocated to when he realized he wouldn't be able to win New York. So it is so tight at the moment. It is very exciting, but we're going to have to be very patient just to allow the electoral process to run its course.
Ollie, thank you very much. In our results hub, keeping track of all of those projections as and when they come through, we'll bring them live to you. Now, as I mentioned, we are expecting to hear very shortly from President Donald Trump. We have already, a couple of hours ago, heard from Joe Biden, Democratic nominee, and this is what he had to say.
And by the way, it's going to take time to count the votes. We're going to win Pennsylvania. I've been talking to folks in Philly, Allegheny County, Scranton, and they're really encouraged by the turnout and what they see. Look, you know, we could know the results as early as tomorrow morning, but it may take a little longer. As I've said all along, it's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election.
Well, as the election campaign's been underway, our team in the Cube have been looking at misinformation, and there's been no shortage of it in the last few hours. Alex in the Cube has the latest.
Well, Rosie, indeed, the story developing through the morning now, coming from the tweets from Donald Trump. We're waiting. We're moments away from hearing from him speak. Joe Biden did speak at a press conference earlier on. But here, a tweet from the president. We know, of course, his favourite medium of communication was labelled as being disputed, potentially misleading. You have to click through to read it, where Donald Trump insinuating the election is being stolen from him by the Democrats. Now, crucially, this means this tweet cannot be liked or simply retweeted. If you want to share it, you have to quote it. This is part of Twitter's aim to slow the spread of posts that could be, well, as you can see here, highly contentious. This line, steal the vote, echoing hashtags we saw circulating online, targeting Pennsylvania. We know a key battleground state. Baseless accusations are directed against election officials there, with many hashtags suggesting the vote was being stolen from Donald Trump. Many people saying this language here from the president, it's like upping the ante, if you like. Well, on Facebook, initially their label was generic. Now they have put this label here. We knew they were going to do this. Any suggestion that a candidate could prematurely try and suggest they've won, as you see, we are up big, Donald Trump says at the top. They add this label here saying, the final results are not yet in. Follow this link to our voting information center. Why does it matter? This moment now, where we are right now, we've been talking about it for weeks. This is the time between the results starting to come in and us knowing who the winner is. Fears that the president is attempting to undermine the postal ballots, the absentee ballots still being counted, and take advantage of this moment to prematurely declare victory. The platform's under massive pressure to put these labels out there, but already Eric Trump criticizing Twitter, echoing things we've seen in the past when they've used these labels on the president's tweets, saying it's big tech censoring the president again. It's going to be very interesting when he speaks in person to see if he's going to have this same bullish tone, echoing this line here, like steal the election, whether that is going to be something he says. Worth saying, when we're looking at Pennsylvania, where there's been a huge amount of disinformation, electoral officials there, very clear, many of these tweets simply no basis at all, and other ones, of course, repeating these campaign lines that mail-in ballots are unreliable, people pushing back saying they are not, that is baseless. But the president here, his tweet being labelled, we wait to see what he'll say in person.
Alex, thank you very much. And our team in the Cube are on hand. So when we get those claims that look suspicious or claims of misinformation, they can debunk them straight for us. Well, let's get the latest from Washington, D.C. and our reporter, Ray Suarez. Ray, we are expecting to hear from the president very shortly, but in the meantime, it has ended up being a closer race than the polls were predicting.
Well, it may end up that Joe Biden wins the popular vote. That is the vote of people going into polling places and choosing their preference for president by even more voters than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. But the American system doesn't necessarily reward getting more votes. Senior campaign officials on both the Democratic and Republican side cut their teeth as young operatives in the 2020 campaigns of Vice President Al Gore and soon-to-be President George W. Bush, who was then the governor of Texas. They learned a tough lesson. The Democrats look back at 2000 with horror because they remember that Al Gore conceded too soon. George Bush declared victory, and even though Al Gore had won the popular vote, and if he had prevailed in Florida, would have won the election going away, a public impression was created that Gore was behind, that Bush was ahead, and that Gore was obstructing the operation of the process, the graceful operation of the American process, and standing in George Bush's way. And that, it was well understood, helped set the scene for the Supreme Court later that year to declare George W. Bush the winner. This may be one of the most important speeches of Donald Trump's brief career as a politician. He will set expectations among his followers and among his opponents as he tries to shape the public impression of the race by what he says tonight. Biden, when the polls opened this morning, was favored to win in many of the states that are still out: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada and Arizona, where big Latino votes have come out, among Mexican Americans who favor Biden more heavily than other Latino ethnic groups. And this is hardly over, but the president knows that he can make a very big step in public impressions if he comes out tonight and says he's won. Rosie?
Well, we'll be hearing from the White House shortly. We've got eyes on that so that you won't be missing it from home. But just tell us, Ray, to what extent has this been Donald Trump, particularly post his coronavirus infection and those big rallies, how successful has he been at mobilizing that support from his core base?
It's been, this will be something that people write about for years. As coronavirus infections were setting new records, not only state records in states across the country that hadn't suffered very much from the pandemic yet, but also just in absolute terms, 80,000, 90,000 new cases a day, more than 1,000 people dying a day. After 230,000 people had already lost their lives, the President of the United States was on television multiple times a day, telling rapturous crowds that they were turning a corner on the coronavirus, that we were near the end, and slagging the media for exaggerating the crisis. He would say in a disappointed way, with these people it's just COVID, 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 and the audience cheered. Onlookers said, this can't be a winning strategy. Going to places that are suffering with the virus, where people know people who are in the hospital and dying, this can't work. Well, take a look at where the big turnouts have come in these final days. Take a look at how the polls have tightened in some of these states that he's visited. His upbeat, positive message about the coronavirus, even as it continues to take lives, seems to have worked.
Ray Suarez, thank you very much. Our reporter there in Washington, D.C. Now, as I have said, we are expecting to hear imminently from President Donald Trump speaking at the White House. As soon as he does that, we'll bring it to you live, of course. Right now, though, I'm joined in the studio by Errol Porte, a lecturer at Sciences Po University in Lyon and expert on American politics. Look, this isn't really where pollsters thought we'd be at this time. Why might some of those predictions have turned out not to be all that accurate?
Well, they were predicting essentially a 90% chance of Biden sweeping many of the swing states and winning the elections. And they were expecting many of the swing states to turn blue with this election. The problem is that, as you know, a precise prediction is complicated because it's an indirect election system, and we're looking at electors, we're looking at state results. And when the race is close, it's very difficult to predict. The pollsters clearly expected more states to switch to the blue side. The big question is, didn't they consider 2016 as too much of an abnormality? Because historically, a lot of the swing states that they were expecting are actually conservative states, and they have retained, the Republican Party has retained a conservative stronghold on these states. And Trump, he's a Republican, and he's now proving that he has support from his base, support from Republican voters, support from rural voters, and the people, the 40% that have supported him along his term, are still supporting him.
If Joe Biden wants to make traction, and we know some of these states, it could take a couple of days, if not weeks, for us to get final confirmation. What paths to the presidency are available and open at this point to Joe Biden?
Well, the mail-in ballots have clearly been mitigated at this point by Republican voters showing on the day of the election. But it's going to take days to recount all those ballots, especially in the key states that we're defining now, such as Pennsylvania. And we're seeing an army of lawyers from both the Republican side and the Democratic side gearing up for a battle to contest these different states. So it's going to be probably messy, would be my expectation. The closer the election, the messier it gets. So in 2000, we had a similar situation with Florida. So what we should expect is a Florida multiplied by how many states are closed. So it could be a 2000 election multiplied by 3 or 4 or 5 states where the lawyers start contesting the results of the elections.
Where are those really critical states that we need to be watching out for over the next sort of 24, 48 hours?
Well, Arizona is a very interesting one because that could be one of the ones that Biden flips, and it's looking like that. And we need to look at Wisconsin, we need to look at Michigan, we need to look at Pennsylvania. So those key states that Hillary Clinton was not able to switch, was not able to retain for the Democratic Party. We need to look if Biden can actually get them back into the Democratic stronghold. And remember, historically, those states are blue states, so it's a possibility. But the Trump message was very successful there. The America First, the American industry message that Trump delivered was extremely popular in those industrial states. So this is actually a big question mark at the moment. We need to watch for those states. If Biden cannot get these states back onto the Democratic side, then it's over really for Joe Biden.
Well, thank you very much. Well, you are with us on a very special morning, our US election coverage, rolling coverage of all of the projections as they come in. Just remind you quickly of where we currently stand. So the Republican Party nominee Donald Trump has secured Texas, Ohio and Florida, as well as 4 of Nebraska's 5 electoral votes. These are some of the states that he really does need in his hopes to remain in office. Well, Democrat Joe Biden believes he's on track to win the US election. Mr. Biden currently has an overall lead over Mr. Trump in vote projections, but so far has failed to flip any states. Now, we are seeing some movement. Trump's family and his entourage have come out, so we can bring you some live pictures now of the White House. We've already heard from a very, I'd say quite buoyant Joe Biden, who's spoken already just a couple of hours ago. We are watching and waiting the White House to hear from the US President Donald Trump. As soon as he makes a statement, we'll bring it to you. Of course, here at Euronews, we've got our results presenter, Oliver Whitfield-Miocic. So as soon as those projections come out, we can bring them to you. We know some of the critical states to come. We can see now Donald Trump coming out of the White House to make a statement. Let's go live there now.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please sit. Thank you. This is without question the latest news conference I've ever had. Thank you. I appreciate it very much. And I want to thank the American people for their tremendous support. Millions and millions of people voted for us tonight. And a very sad group of people is trying to disenfranchise that group of people. And we won't stand for it. We will not stand for it. I want to thank the First Lady, my entire family, and Vice President Pence, Mrs. Pence, for being with us all through this. And we were getting ready for a big celebration.
of a sudden it was just called off. The results tonight have been phenomenal, and we are getting ready. I mean, literally, we were just all set to get outside and just celebrate something that was so beautiful, so good. Such a vote, such a success. The citizens of this country have come out in record numbers. This is a record. There's never been anything like it. To support our incredible movement, we won states that we weren't expected to win. Florida, we didn't win it. We won it by a lot. And we won the great state of Ohio. We won Texas. We won Texas. We won Texas by 700,000 votes, and they don't even include it in the tabulations. It's also clear that we have won Georgia. We're up by 2.5% or 117,000 votes with only 7% left. They're never going to catch us. They can't catch us. Likewise, we've clearly won North Carolina, where we're up 1.4% or 77,000 votes with only approximately 5% left. They can't catch us. We also, if you look and you see, Arizona, we have a lot of life in that. And somebody declared that it was a victory for, and maybe it will be. I mean, that's possible. But certainly there were a lot of votes out there that we could get, because we're now just coming into what they call Trump territory. I don't know what you call it, but these were friendly Trump voters. And that could be overturned. The gentleman that called it, I watched tonight, he said, well, we think it's fairly unlikely that he could catch. Well, fairly unlikely. And we don't even need it. We don't need that. That was just a state that if we would have gotten it, it would have been nice, Arizona. But there's a possibility, maybe even a good possibility. In fact, since I saw that originally, it's been changed, and the numbers have substantially come down just in a small amount of votes. So we want that, obviously, to stay in play. But most importantly, we're winning Pennsylvania by a tremendous amount of votes. We're up 600. Think of this. Think of this. Think of this. We're up 690,000 votes in Pennsylvania. 690,000. These aren't even close. It's not like, oh, it's close. With 64% of the vote in, it's going to be almost impossible to catch. And we're coming into good Pennsylvania areas where they happen to like your president. I mean, it's so we'll probably expand that. We're winning Michigan by, I'll tell you, I looked at the numbers. I said, whoa. I said, wow, that's a lot. By almost 300,000 votes. And 65% of the vote is in. And we're winning Wisconsin. So we're winning. We don't need all of them. We need, because when you add Texas in, which wasn't added, I spoke with the really wonderful governor of Texas just a little while ago, and Greg Abbott, he said, congratulations. He called me to congratulate me on winning Texas. I mean, we won Texas. I don't think they finished quite the tabulation, but there's no way. And it was almost complete, but he congratulated me. And he said, by the way, what's going on? I've never seen anything like this. Can I tell you what? Nobody has. So we won by 107,000 votes with 81% of the vote. That's Michigan. So when you take those three states in particular, and you take all of the others, I mean, we have so many. We had such a big night. You just take a look at all of these states that we've won tonight, and then you take a look at the kind of margins that we've won them by. And all of a sudden, it's not like we're up 12 votes and we have 60% left. we won states, and all of a sudden, I said, what happened to the election? It's off. And we have all these announcers saying, what happened? And then they said, oh, because you know what happened? They knew they couldn't win. So they said, let's go to court. And did I predict this, Newt? Did I say this? I've been saying this from the day I heard they were going to send out tens of millions of ballots. I said exactly, because either they were going to win, or if they didn't win, they'll take us to court. So Florida was a tremendous victory, 377,000. Texas, as we said. Ohio, think of this. Ohio, a tremendous state, a big state. I love Ohio. We won by 8.1%, 461. Think of it. Almost 500,000 votes. North Carolina, big victory with North Carolina. And so we won there. We lead by 76,000 votes with almost nothing left. And all of a sudden, everything just stopped. This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment, and we will win this, and as far as I'm concerned, we already have won. So I just want to thank you, and I want to thank all of our support. I want to thank all of the people that worked with us, and Mr. Vice President. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to join you in thanking more than 60 million Americans who have already cast their vote for 4 more years for President Donald Trump in the White House. And while the votes continue to be counted, we're going to remain vigilant, as the President said. The right to vote has been at the center of our democracy since the founding of this nation, and we're going to protect the integrity of the vote. But I really believe with all of my heart, with the extraordinary margins, Mr. President, that you've inspired in the states that you just described, and the way that you launched this movement across the country to make America great again, I truly do believe, as you do, that we are on the road to victory, and we will make America great again. Thank you, Mr. President.
So we've just been hearing from the US President Donald Trump speaking from the White House. I do have to say it is perfectly normal and legal for votes to be counted, in contrast to what the President just laid out there, particularly after ballot day. Now, different states have got different rules, and we'll be bringing you that a little bit later. Also, we're going to be looking at some of the claims that Mr. Trump just made there, particularly about having won North Carolina and Georgia before any projections have actually been announced. Let's get the very latest, though, from Washington, D.C. and our reporter, Ray Suarez. Ray, what did you make of that? It was a more considered tone from the president than we're perhaps used to. He looked, in fact, at least initially at the start of that statement, more presidential.
Well, the tone may have been different, but pay a lot of attention to the content. There were a lot of options for how the president could play this moment. He decided to declare full-on war. He knows very well, and his advisors know very well, that vote counts go on for days after election days. I've covered every presidential election since 1984, and in every single case, there were votes that were counted after the election. By trying to set a time and say, now that I'm ahead, I want the counting to stop, he is in effect saying that the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of votes that haven't yet been tabulated are somehow illicit. A Republican candidate for president has won the popular vote and become president once since 1988. As the Republican Party looks at the demographic future of the United States, a future where it will become more difficult for Republican candidates to win national elections, to try and win it this way is audacious, it's stunning, and it violates years, decades of conventions governing the way political candidates act. In 1960, the race was extremely tight between John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon. Nixon's advisors pressed him to challenge Kennedy in the days after Election Day to try to bring that result closer and capture the presidency. He said that it would be bad for the country to do it, and he conceded the race to his Democratic rival. Again, in 2000, Al Gore conceded rather than continue the fight. Even though his advisors said, if you hang on in Florida, you can win this thing, he thought it would be too destructive. Donald Trump, in effect, just made a declaration of war. This is going to have tremendous consequences.
We were anticipating, Ray, that there may be legal challenges to come out of the White House, and that certainly has been confirmed. Donald Trump saying there he'd be prepared to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. What kind of battles do you think they're going to focus on? Is it about preventing some of the votes that have already been made, or stopping some of those additional votes that still legally can come in the next few days?
Because we have 50 electoral systems in this country and 50 different sets of laws that govern things like absentee ballots, paper ballots, mail-in ballots, this is going to be played state by state. The Secretary of State of each American state is the chief electoral officer. Many of them, more than half, are Republicans and are supporters of the president. This is going to be some interesting days ahead, because routinely the volume is much greater this time, obviously because of the coronavirus pandemic, but there is a routine, there is a system for counting these ballots, and the secretaries of state in some of these disputed states were already signaling days ago that it was going to take them a couple of days to go through these ballots. The president wants to short-circuit that process. He wants to challenge every ballot. Some of this is the routine back and forth that goes on in these days after a close election. But what the president just laid out, an attempt to, in effect, stop the count because he's ahead, is something that's quite separate, quite a departure from American custom in this regard.
Ray, thank you very much. We'll be checking back in with you with instant reaction from what President Donald Trump has just said. Well, some of the claims that are extremely contentious that the president has made is that he'd won states like North Carolina and Georgia. Let's take a look at the facts. We can go to Ollie in our results hub. Ollie, can we say that's true, particularly North Carolina and Georgia? Also, Donald Trump has said he's got really early gains in Pennsylvania, but we know we're not going to hear results out of that state for a while yet to come, maybe even a few days. Tell us what we know for sure.
Well, what we know for sure is based on the data that we get from the Associated Press, Rosie. And they are really in charge of all of the monitoring of elections over in the US. It's such a huge operation for them. And you can see here, these are the current tallies that they've allocated for the candidates. 225 Electoral College votes for Joe Biden, 213 for Donald Trump. They need to hit 270 votes. So you can see here, these are the lists of states that the Republicans have won. Let's go quickly now through to actually where we need to see how the Republicans have done this. Then we can go into these claims a little bit more. Let's have a look quick at the states for the Democrats. If we can pull that data on, it's all pretty much exactly the same. There's nothing, there's no big surprises in there. let's have a look at Texas first of all. Now, Texas here. He's managed to win this, Donald Trump, by actually getting people to go out and vote. That was the big challenge for the Republicans here. We'd all heard about how the Democrats voted early in huge numbers, and he needed people, especially out in the suburbs, in the more rural areas, to come out. And it looks like that's exactly what's happened. The same thing has happened in Florida, and you've got to realize that Donald Trump has managed to have actual in-person campaigning, people going door to door. Let's bring on Florida. People going door to door to canvass voters, whereas actually Joe Biden has pretty much stood back for most of this. He didn't want to put people at risk because of the coronavirus. Florida is exactly the same, 29 electoral college votes. Let's have a look at some of these claims though. Georgia. Now, Georgia has not been declared, and you can see there is still a 3 percentage point gap, and yet we've got 1% of precincts to count. There is just too close a margin here for this to be declared. That's why we haven't declared it, and so we've got to wait. It is not right for Donald Trump to say that that has been declared in his favor. The same with Pennsylvania. Donald Trump, yes, he might be right. He might be in the lead here, but you've got to remember, they haven't been able to count all of those early ballots, which we know favors the Democrats, and that isn't expected until about 3 o'clock today, Central European time. North Carolina, another one. There's only 1 percentage point between them, but it has yet to be declared, even though all of the precincts have been reported. And so that's why at this moment in time, it is very difficult, Rosie, for us to say that Donald Trump is correct in saying that he's won those areas, because it has not been actually projected in his favor, and maybe this is the reason why he is going down the legal route. All of the challenges we've seen in the lead up to this race now continuing afterwards.
Ollie, thank you very much. In our results hub, fact-checking the president. Really appreciate that. Ollie, we'll be back in with you as soon as we get more projections. Well, let's go to Joe Biden's home state to get some immediate reaction from that camp there to some of the claims made by President Donald Trump. Our reporter Andy Roseton is there. Andy, so how's it going down? Oh, can you hear me? We've lost Andy just temporarily. We'll come back to him as and when we can. So let's see. So just to give you a bit of a summary of where we are, the Associated Press called Florida for Donald Trump. We're going to go to speak to our reporter Natalie as soon as we can do from there. But really, to just tell you what's happened, we've had Democratic nominee Joe Biden make a statement. Donald Trump has made a very clear, robust statement from the White House, and I've got correspondents here with us on both sides of the Atlantic to tease out what is happening. Joining me on set right now is Aurora, who's been with me so far this morning, talking us through the latest results. Just tell me your instant reaction to what President Trump had to say and some of the claims, particularly we've already said it looked like there were going to be legal battles in this, and Donald Trump has more than confirmed that.
Well, I think Trump is playing his role here. We were expecting that in a close election. That was one of the scenarios that we were really expecting. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to sow doubt, right? He's saying we did win this election, there's major fraud going on. He's talking about disenfranchisement, which is a huge word, saying that the Republican votes for some reasons would not be counted. This is obviously not based on any factual truth. But the problem is that even if it's just rhetorical, it could be very dangerous. And let me explain why. People could go to the street, right, following his speech and try to contest the election. I'm thinking especially of militias like the Proud Boys that have supported him in the past, and they could go to the streets and try to create some violence. Obviously, this is illegal, and it will probably be addressed by the police, but it gives a potential for violence and uprisings in the streets, and some of these groups could feel momentum to actually go to the streets and contest the election. We also have a legal challenge in the form of armies of lawyers from the Republican side going to states like Pennsylvania. So you have to remember that they're not going straight to the Supreme Court, like Trump said, but obviously they're going to contest the election on a state level, because according to the American Constitution, it's important to remember that even if it's a federal election, the states are in charge of that. So they could go and contest the election. They could also try to pressure state legislatures that actually have some control over the result of the election to actually, if the vote is very close, they could have an action on the electors that are the vote of the electors for a specific state. So this is actually a possibility, and it's definitely an objective for the Republican Party and for Trump to limit the number of voters. So when Trump declares victory on Pennsylvania, this is obviously not correct, because we're going to have a long recount. We're going to have mail-in ballots counted, and we know that a majority of those mail-in ballots are potentially Democratic votes. So just to summarize, I would say there's a lot of rhetoric here. It's more of a stance, but it's potentially an announcement of how things are going to go. And we see Trump very calm here, very collected. So this is a strong sign that he expects to challenge the election if it goes in Biden's way for the big contested states like Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you very much. Now let's talk a little bit more about the actual, sorry I'm here, let's talk a little bit more about the counting process. And let's go back to Washington DC to speak to our reporter who's there, Ray Suarez. So Ray, just explain to us how the next few hours and days are going to play out, and when we're going to hear from some of those very critical states, particularly let's say Pennsylvania, which Donald Trump has just said, as far as he believes, he's in the lead. When are we actually going to get clarity on this?
Well, in the case of some counties that are still out in Pennsylvania, they've already announced that they're stopping for the night, sending their people home to get some sleep, and then starting up again at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. They have unofficially let people know in the state that it's going to take perhaps as much as 48 or 72 more hours to complete the count. The way it usually goes, especially in an urban county, is that you'll have one Democratic judge of elections, one Republican judge of elections, and a neutral observer, and they look at each ballot before putting it through a machine that tabulates the vote. If the vote is unclear, if the ballot wasn't marked properly, if it wasn't sealed properly, one judge or another might challenge that ballot, and there's got to be a 2-to-1 vote or a 3-0 vote, taking a look at that ballot over whether to count it. Some of these ballots are set aside and then re-adjudicated after the count is complete, but they try at that moment to take a look at whether the paper ballot was properly and legally executed before they put it through the tabulation machines. It's a slow process. You can only do, accumulated 1,000 or so an hour, because you're looking at the ballot. States have different laws regarding how you pack these ballots in envelopes and where you sign the envelope once you do that. Pennsylvania has a 2-envelope system where once you seal it in one envelope, you have to put it in a second one and seal it in a correct way that has the ballot address showing through the transparent window. It's very complicated. Cynics would say it's very complicated on purpose to make it easier to control the count and disenfranchise certain voters. There's a big vote in Philadelphia, a majority-minority city that still has to come in. A large Black and Latino vote in Philadelphia and in some of the nearby counties. A big urban vote in Pittsburgh that still has not been completely tabulated. Donald Trump and his advisors know very well that there is a potential for those uncounted ballots to change the picture in the state of Pennsylvania, which is turning out to be, the nickname of Pennsylvania is the Keystone State. It's turning out to be the keystone for the 2020 election. Rosie?
Thank you very much, Ray Suarez, talking to us there from Washington, D.C. Well, now, we know that across the Atlantic, Europeans, many of them would have wanted a vote, but they can just only watch on from the side. Let's see how it's all playing out the other side of the Atlantic, and particularly the European reaction. We can go to speak to Maeve McMahon in Brussels. Maeve, I'm going to ask you that. Donald Trump has made some sensational claims. Frankly, we did win, he said. How is that playing out across Europe?
Well, good morning, Rosie. We're hearing very little from lawmakers here in Brussels and representatives from the European institutions, but I can see already on Twitter a number of European journalists and newspapers reacting, concerned about possible public disorder that could come about now. One journalist, Brian Maguire, tweeting that there could be a discussion now on civil war. He said, join us right after the president stops delegitimising the election. And here, while we wait for more concrete outcomes, we've been taking a look at the European press to see how they've been reporting about the elections. And if you look at Croatian newspaper Novi List, they said they're hoping for a new beginning. They said that much will change for the better in their eyes if Biden wins. There'll be a much more willingness to cooperate with Europe and everyone else. And then if you take a look at a Hungarian newspaper, a weekly newspaper called HVG, that's a paper a little bit like the British Economist. And they say, no, actually, a single election will not change much in the world. They say that a billionaire from New York, Donald Trump, managed to capture the anti-elitist discontent that's been building up all around the world for many years. And they reckon that, like an infection, Trumpism could continue to exist even without Trump, and even if the name of the man in the White House is Joe Biden. And then the Wiener Zeitung, that's a newspaper from Austria daily, there's an article there saying the EU needs to remain very, very calm, especially when it comes to on how it reacts to the outcome of this election. And that's especially if that outcome is contested. The writer says this will be a major test for European integration. Well, for more on all of this, we can talk now to Fabrice Potier. He, Rosie, is a Chief Strategy Officer from Rasmussen Global. That's a consultancy that was set up by the former Secretary General of NATO, that's Anders Fogh Rasmussen. And Fabrice Potier, thank you for joining us here this morning. Good morning. You were there listening in with us to that speech a couple of minutes ago of Donald Trump. How do you feel after listening to it?
Well, he's playing the typical Trump playbook. He's claiming victory even before he has won. And he's actually accusing the other side to plot against Trump's America. So, and I think we're going to see a lot of that in the coming days until we have the full results, especially in the swing states like Pennsylvania. So, and I think both sides are trying to energize each other's base. Trump does it in a negative way by saying they have been robbed, there is a plot against us. And Biden is trying to do it in a positive way by saying we are en route to victory.
Indeed, as you said, this was totally expected, and that's why we're seeing such a cautious reaction, perhaps, from the institutions today in Brussels.
Yes, I think what was not fully expected was that Trump would still do pretty well in some key states like Florida. He actually did, at least what we can see from the provisional results, he did better than in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. And I think some, including in America, were expecting a kind of blue wave, and we have not seen that. And that means two things. One, it's going to be played very much between very few states and at the last hour. And second, that means the Senate, which is crucial for any president in the White House, will probably stay Republican. And that will be a bit of a headache for Joe Biden if he's elected.
And if Joe Biden is elected, how do you think the transatlantic relationship could look over the next 4 years? Do you think it could be improved?
I think on the symbolic level, it will be almost immediately, because Biden is a transatlantist. He's a familiar face in Europe. He's made some commitment to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, which actually officially today the US has left. So I think on the symbolic, in the first few hours of Biden's presidency, things will be pretty good for Europe. But I think once you go into the weed of figuring out a transatlantic cooperation, things will still be complicated. For example, on the trade front, Biden is actually a typical Democrat. He's a trade skeptic. And the politics around trade have shifted quite negatively in the US, but also actually in Europe. We're all a bit more protectionist than we were before. So I think the fundamentals of the transatlantic relationship will still be difficult, even if the style and the tone will be much more positive.
And what about if it's Trump? How would you foresee things?
I think if it's Trump, it will accelerate and amplify what we have seen over the last few years, meaning, for example, that Europe will start really thinking seriously about what does it mean to be more independent, including from a security point of view from the United States. And I think voices like President Macron calling for a greater strategic autonomy for Europe will probably dominate the debate in Europe, whilst now you still have some, especially in Germany, who believe in the soundness of the transatlantic relationship and the fact that the US is indispensable to Europe. So I think Europe will become more European as an effect of Trump being re-elected.
And Fabrice, you've of course worked in NATO for many years. What about the future of NATO, the organisation that Trump on many occasions has called obsolete? I mean, regardless of who's in the White House, how do you see the future of it?
Well, it's not going to be easy because what NATO has managed so far is to keep the political corrosiveness of Trump disconnected from what NATO does on the ground, which actually over the last few years has been pretty good, including US contributions. And there might be a day of reckoning. Trump cannot exit NATO because he will need the Congress to approve that, and the Congress, even Republican, will not approve that. But what he can do is to further push the US away from NATO, and put more doubt into the US commitment to Europe. And that will, I think, start paralyzing the alliance, especially at the time when he needs to elect a new Secretary General and when he needs to write a new strategic concept, which is kind of its roadmap for what it's going to do and how it's going to do things in the coming years. So I think NATO is set, if Trump is re-elected, for a pretty tough, turbulent time.
Okay, we'll be keeping an eye on all that. Fabrice Potier, Chief Strategy Officer there from Rasmussen Global. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Maeve, thank you very much. Well, let's move over from Brussels across the continent to France to see how the election is being played out there. Our international correspondent Annelise Borges is in Paris. Annelise, a very good morning to you. How is this being seen in France?
Hi there, Rosie. Well, the US elections are being closely followed here in Paris and across the country, of course. Politicians very tight-lipped about who they want to see next in the White House. But on Twitter, we've seen photos circulating of pretty much all Emmanuel Macron's ministers following election results throughout the night. Emmanuel Macron himself has not tweeted, has not spoken about it. Of course, this is part of his strategy of not manifesting any kind of preference for now. Emmanuel Macron cherishes his position of a very diplomatic world leader, but there's no hiding that France is looking for a restart of this US-France relationship. Donald Trump has pulled out of virtually all the agreements he could, agreements that France cherished, of course, the Paris Climate Agreement, the JCPOA with Iran, the World Health Organization, the US is no longer part of. All these agreements and institutions that France believed and cherished as part of a stable international order. There's going to have to be a lot of work done in that respect if another US president was to come into the White House. So that could be, of course, a preference behind the scenes. That is something that the French would have liked to have seen. Now it's a waiting game here in France as well. We all remember that both presidents used to enjoy a very close relationship, a bromance of sorts. We all remember that hard but never-ending handshake between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump. The ties have cooled throughout the last few years. Now, very recently, Donald Trump actually called Emmanuel Macron the French prime minister. That did not go down well here in France, but it's very much a waiting game. No reaction from French politicians for the moment. We kind of know what they would expect to come next to the White House. Rosie?
Annelise, thank you very much, our correspondent there in Paris. Right, we're going to head right over to our results hub. We're promising to keep you up to date as and when we get projections. Oliver Whitfield-Miocic is there for us. Ollie, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Brilliant. We've got some news out of Arizona. Tell us more.
Yes, I do. And very big news indeed for the Democrats and for Joe Biden. The Associated Press now in a position to project Arizona for Joe Biden. This is a big win for him. It is the first swing state that he has managed to flip from the Republicans, taking 11 electoral college votes, pushing his total from 236 out of the 270 electoral college votes that was needed. And this has been a change of demographics that shifted the vote here for him. We've seen people moving out of California into Arizona because house prices are becoming more expensive in California. They've moved to Arizona. They've changed what was used to be a bastion of republicanism, of conservatism. As younger people have moved in there, college graduates, they've brought in new ideals, as well as a big Hispanic vote. And what's interesting here is we're talking about how important the Hispanic vote was in Florida. Not all of the Hispanic vote is going to vote the same way. In Florida, it was all about socialism and creating fear, which is what turned voters towards the Republicans. In Arizona, remember, this is right on the border with Mexico. Arizona has been one of those key places where people have been rounded up for the Department of Homeland Security, had their papers checked to see if they're illegal immigrants, bundled into buses and sometimes driven back over the border with Mexico. Those type of images have created distrust in the Latin community. And so here we're seeing those 11 Electoral College votes going Arizona to Joe Biden.
Ollie, thank you very much, keeping us up to date. The very latest projections there out of Arizona. Well, you are with a very special edition of the programme. We're rolling all morning, making sure as soon as those projections come out, we bring them to you. Don't go anywhere. We're keeping you up to date. We're going to take a very short break, but let's have a no comment now, where there have been some scenes of unrest in the United States.
Thank you so much for watching. If you want to follow more of our journey and music travel live, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Follow us on all the socials from
All the latest results and reactions from the US elections coming up shortly in a special edition of Good Morning Europe on Euronews.
Hello and welcome back to our continuing coverage of the US presidential election. You're with me, Rosie Wright, and here is the story as it stands. The nail-biting race for the White House. Donald Trump is winning the key swing states in the presidential election, but wants to end the counts in other states early.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country.
I'm Ray Suarez, live in Washington, D.C. I'll be assessing the results and the legal implication of what's going on in America this evening.
Democratic challenger Joe Biden is still hoping to secure enough Electoral College votes to lead a new White House administration. He's won safe Democratic seats and also gained Arizona.
We believe we're on track to win this election.
I'm Oliver with you, Amir Chich, in the Euronews results studio, analysing all of the latest data as it comes in. As things stand, Joe Biden has 236 Electoral College votes. Donald Trump is on 213.
I'm Alex Morgan, and I'll be bringing you the very latest reaction as Donald Trump appears to cast doubt on the whole election process, calling victory early. We'll have the latest in the queue.
It's not just about the White House. Democrats are hoping to gain control of both houses of Congress, but early indications suggest they're failing to make the necessary gains. Well, hello and welcome back to our continuing coverage of the United States presidential election. As it currently stands, Donald Trump has won the key swing states of Florida, Ohio and Iowa. They are states he won in 2016 and retaining them was seen as critical to his re-election bid. Joe Biden has picked up states that traditionally vote Democrat, such as California and New York, and has made a breakthrough in Arizona. There are still a number of states in play, those traditional Republican strongholds such as North Carolina, Georgia, but also Donald Trump has secured Texas. Well, in this very special program, we're looking at the race for the White House, Donald Trump's claims, and we're bringing you insight, analysis and perspective. We've got guests, correspondents and contributors on both sides of the Atlantic as we dissect the results and look forward to what they mean for the EU, the continent of Europe and the wider world. Well, let's begin our coverage now with hearing directly from the president. Earlier, he spoke to the public and he said a few moments ago that he'd won incorrectly Ohio and North Carolina.
This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment.
So sorry, President Trump saying that he'd won North Carolina, and Ollie in our Results Hub has firmly confirmed that that is not the case. Well, let's hear from the other side. Earlier, Democratic nominee Joe Biden said he was confident of the road to victory.
And by the way, it's going to take time to count the votes. We're going to win Pennsylvania. I've been talking to folks in Philly, Allegheny County, Scranton, and they're really encouraged by the turnout and what they see. Look, you know, we could know the results as early as tomorrow morning, but it may take a little longer. As I've said all along, it's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election.
Well, let's actually look at the state of play. Let's go to Ollie in our Results Hub, who can talk us through from the fact and the fiction. Ollie, we've had some rather sensational claims direct from the mouth of President Trump in the White House. Can you tell us what we know for sure? Who is projected to win in which state?
Let's got the confirmed information so far then, Rosie. And what we do know is that Joe Biden has got 236 out of 270 Electoral College votes. At the same time, Donald Trump has been projected 213. They need to win 270 in order to get the keys to the White House. Now, maybe the reason why the Republicans are feeling a little bit concerned and are threatening to bring this legal challenge is because of Arizona. This should be a true red state, and yet it has flipped into the control of the Democrats. 11 electoral college votes have now gone there. So then if we look at some of the other states where Donald Trump had mentioned, he'd said that he was winning in North Carolina. Now, we have this down as too close to call because there's only 1 percentage point in this. In North Carolina, a judge has said that votes can arrive up to 9 days after Election Day, so up to the 12th, and still be counted as long as they are postmarked. Is this one of the reasons why Donald Trump does not want for these votes to be counted? Because we know that a lot of the votes that come in via the postal system are by the Democrats. 1 percentage point, it's not a huge margin. Let's go up towards Pennsylvania. You'll see here as well, they've been given 3 extra days to get their postal ballots in and still be counted as valid. There's a bigger margin here this time round, 7 percentage points, but do not forget, now we've already heard from the election officials up in Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh will not be releasing its latest data up until 3 o'clock Central European time. These states are not used to counting the huge increase in what we've seen in the postal ballots that are coming through. Now, I'm just hearing as well now, we're in a position to project that Joe Biden has won the state of Maine. Just want to check here. He has what looks like he's won the whole state of Maine. That'll be worth an extra 4 electoral college votes if he's taken both Maine as a state as well as the 2 congressional districts. And if we just move on, I just want to see if we've got one more of our graphics here that is going to be ready. I don't know if we do. Oh, do we? Yeah, here we go. We've got the absolute system, the way that things stand at the moment. And so you can see these states that are still outliers. Georgia, too close to call. Is this another reason that the president wants to delay to stop the votes being counted because it is too close there? It's going to be a wrangle now in the legislature as well as in the judiciary system. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens from here. But the president is wrong to say that he has won in certain states because the counting goes on for days afterwards. Remember, even soldiers from the US Army, from the military, get to send in their ballots, and those don't arrive for another few weeks, Rosie.
Ollie, thank you very much for bringing us all the latest projections as soon as we get them to you at home. Well, let's go direct to Washington, D.C. now to speak to our reporter, Ray Suarez, who's on the scene for us. Ray, just talk us through some of the extremely contentious, in some cases false claims that have been made by the president this morning, speaking to the nation, not only claiming that he'd won some states, but the election overall. What can we trust from what he had to say this morning?
He went nuclear, in effect, Rosie, when he said a major fraud is being committed. Those are serious words coming from the President of the United States. There's been no durable charge of fraud. There's been no investigation that's turned up any evidence of fraud. But this was an important message to the tens of millions of his supporters across the country that he is bringing into question the validity of the vote, the security of the vote, the ability to believe that when a state board of election tabulates a vote, that total that they come up with is roughly similar to what people cast when they went into the voting booths to cast their vote. A very, very serious term to say a major fraud is being committed on the American public. You'll notice he said, we want to stop the voting. He is putting out there the idea that once the polls closed, people kept voting. Now, it may be an imprecise use of language, but I think in this case he used those words purposely to try to call into question whether these ballots that are still being counted are legitimate ballots cast by registered voters. Again, no investigation has ever called that into question, but he is calling it into question, bringing up the possibility that in the days to come, votes will be, in his words, found in places and added to the total. If you know anything about how these elections are carried on in America, there is a chain of custody. Guards watch over ballot boxes containing large numbers of paper ballots. They're not moved around easily. They're not moved around without anybody knowing where they are and without state officials and law enforcement being involved in the transit of those ballots. So this is a system that states are very much accustomed to. All that's changed, as we heard earlier from theCUBE, is the volume. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, many millions more Americans posted their votes rather than coming into the voting booth to cast them. And that's what we're dealing with now, with Pennsylvania groaning under the weight of this massively increased mail-in ballot. They're not illegitimate. The president tried to stop it. The president, over the last several weeks, has called into question the validity of these ballots, but they are affirmed as legal ballots by the chief election officers of each state, and they were cast in accordance with the laws of those states. So Donald Trump is trying to insinuate, and it's a very important charge, that these ballots are somehow illicit, and if they change the outcome, because right now, with the tabulated vote, he's ahead in Pennsylvania, he will be robbed of his right to remain as president. Rosie?
Right now, we're sort of sitting in this cliffhanger position where it is unclear who will be the overall winner, and that is sort of giving space for these claims of misinformation. We anticipated before this that if this was the outcome at this stage of the game, that Donald Trump might make some of these claims. He's insisted that he's going to ask the Supreme Court to weigh in. How lengthy and complicated are the legal procedures ahead, and what impact could they have on the status of play of the election?
Well, suddenly, seating that ninth justice, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, just in the last couple of days before the polls opened, looks very critical. The revered Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died about 35 days ago, and her funeral hadn't even been conducted before the president affirmed that he was going to name a replacement, and his supporters in the United States Senate rocketed that nomination through the hearing process and to a final vote. Now there are 9 justices on the court, and the Supreme Court justices have been asked several times in the past week to render judgments on different states' laws concerning the handling of ballots, whether ballots had to be postmarked by Election Day, how long they could arrive at their final destination if they were properly postmarked. And some legal scholars have seen in the legal reasoning from the justices in some of these cases signs that they might side with the president if it came down to ruling some ballots unable to be counted.
Thank you very much, Ray Suarez, our reporter there in Washington. Now, Donald Trump's tweets and the comments that he's made at the White House have generated, completely understandably, huge reaction on social media. It's not just from analysts and politicians, but also from the tech companies themselves. Alex has got an overview for us.
Well, Rosie, we've been waiting, I think it's fair to say, expecting a move like this from Donald Trump, and the platforms announced what they were going to do ahead of time. Facebook, here you are. Look at this. This is the press conference. This was the live feed on Donald Trump's page. They added this at the bottom. This was the label they had unveiled if any candidate was going to declare victory prematurely. And what is really interesting is in a tweet, Facebook, using Twitter to explain their policies a bit more, but there we go, this is the world we live in. They really focused in on Donald Trump, calling the president out by name. And we've seen labels applied to President Trump's tweets in the past, on Facebook particularly. There's been generic labels pointing you to information sources. Look at this though. Once President Trump began making premature claims of victory, Facebook said they took this action, saying that official results are not in. As you were hearing from Ray there, The claims from the president are baseless, that this is fraudulent. Votes are still being counted. Fact checkers are going wild on social media, but so too is misinformation fueled by these comments from the president. There was huge pressure on the platforms to have an answer about what they were going to do about these comments. It was expected that the president would say this. On Twitter, it's a bit different. So the president, before he spoke at that press conference, put out a tweet. Now, you'll see here that that tweet was effectively blocked in some senses. It's not immediately apparent. If you want to look at it, you have to click in. But there's a very clear label at the top there saying the tweet is disputed. It could be misleading. This label means that the tweet is effectively hidden from view. It's suppressed in that sense. You also can't like it or retweet it. You have to quote tweet it. It might sound like a load of gibberish there, but it basically means the interaction you have with this post is drastically different to a normal post. It's effectively sticking a tag on it, and we know Eric Trump at least has accused Twitter of censorship here. Now, a lot of people saying, well, despite all this robust action, these posts remain on the sites. Many people saying they're not true, and you can see the anger directed at the platforms, even though they've put this into action. If I can just focus in then perhaps on the reaction, quite understandably, from a lot of Democratic politicians, I think it's summed up here. You got references to George Orwell in these comments. Rosie, this is a fight I think we expected. Comments from the president we expected, but now it's playing out in our social media feeds. Looking at Twitter at least, you think America is heading for a constitutional row, if not a constitutional crisis, in the hours to come.
Alex, thank you very much. As when we get all of those updates, Alex is here with us across the morning to fact check them so that you can trust the information that we're bringing to you. Well, let's look a little bit more at the wider picture of the results as they stand. Aurore Porte is a lecturer at Sciences Po in Lyon and a specialist in American politics. Joining me again, look, this has been, up until this point, people were saying, particularly pollsters or the population pundits, saying this election really would be a referendum on Donald Trump. What we're seeing at this point, has that been the case?
It has not. We really thought it would be a referendum on Trump. It is turning out not to be so. Biden even went as far as describing Trump as an aberration, and it looks like he might not be such an aberration, and he might be here to stay. The map we're seeing, the election map we're seeing right now, is more of a classical election map. And with states actually going historically in a conservative direction like they have been for a while. Right. And overall, if you look at previous election, Biden is actually doing better than Clinton and Kerry, but he's actually doing worse than Obama is doing. Right? He's losing Florida, he's lost Florida, but he's winning Arizona. That would be on a plus sign. So the biggest question now really is, will there be any flips other than Arizona to the Democratic side? Will the Rust Belt, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania return to the Democratic side? Will workers return to their traditional Democratic Party affiliation, or will they stay with Trump and his America First message?
And some of those really critical swing states we're not going to hear from a while. Despite that, Donald Trump had said incorrectly that he knew he was already in the lead in Pennsylvania. The other thing that people were suggesting before is that this election might be sort of a referendum when it came to people's opinion of Donald Trump's handling of coronavirus. I mean, the US leads the world in terms of number of cases, the total number of deaths. Has that been what's happened? Has that been reflected in the polls? Because the pandemic has changed this presidential race significantly. That's why we've seen so many people voting early rather than in person at the ballot box.
I think it might have been a little bit of wishful thinking on the parts of experts. So as you know, Trump decided not to listen to scientists, to the CDC, even to his own White House advisors. And he didn't take any tough measures like mask mandates. And we thought this might make a part of the electorate angry, especially independents and some of his conservative voters. Well, it turns out that this election might be more a referendum on the economy rather than on COVID, because the American economy is not doing so bad. They have lost 20 million jobs, but they were able to regain 10. And we've always said that the economy was a very strong point for elections, so it might be that people are actually voting on the economy and not on COVID. And just a few things to consider to better understand those Trump voters. Many of them still consider COVID as a hoax, as something that is not dangerous. And many of them consider that this is an individual decision, wearing a mask, being careful. So they're not looking for any decision-making from the White House. They actually think they can make their own decisions. This is more of the conservative mind. They also think it is a state matter and not a federal matter, right? That the regulations should come from the state government. So in a sense, for these voters, if there is a failure on COVID, it is not Trump's fault, right? So they're actually voting for him regardless of anything that has happened on COVID. Remember, it's a federal state, so the states are very important. And the difficulties we're encountering in Europe actually reflect bad to Americans on having strict restrictions on COVID. So for all these reasons, I think the Trump supporters are staying strong and actually did not vote because of COVID, but actually are supporting his economic mandates.
Aurora, thank you very much. Well, if you've just joined us, a very warm welcome to our special US election coverage, looking at the projections and the results falling out from the eyes, of course, of Europeans. I'll just remind you of where we currently stand. Republican Party nominee Donald Trump has secured Texas, Ohio and Florida. The president has made a speech from the White House just moments ago saying that tonight's results have been phenomenal, but he's made unsubstantiated claims of widespread electoral fraud. Democrat Joe Biden, though, believes that he is on track to win the US election. Mr. Biden currently has an overall lead of over Mr. Trump in terms of vote projections and has flipped Arizona in his favor. So let's go now to speak to Andy Rosen, who's in Joe Biden's home state of Delaware, to get a little bit more. He joins us now from Wilmington. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Andy. So there was quite a lot of optimism from the Biden camp going into this election. Nationally, he was in the polls, he was ahead. How's it looking now, and particularly what's the response been to some of the extraordinary and also false claims coming from President Trump?
Well, we're still waiting to hear some of that response. It's about 2:30 in the morning here in Wilmington, Delaware. Actually, behind me, Rosie, is the Chase Center, where we were expecting Joe Biden to show up at some point. This is his campaign headquarters, so we were expecting him. We're not sure if that is still on track for him to get here. He did say earlier in the night to his supporters, keep the faith, he said, as these results start pouring in. But, you know, I should mention, too, that in Wisconsin, a battleground state, and in Michigan as well, they're still counting the votes that were, you know, perfectly valid and coming in. They're not allowed to count any ballots that come in after Election Day. So that's all perfectly on the up and up. It's just that these major cities, these large urban areas in Wisconsin and Michigan have yet to be tallied, and those tend to go more Democratic. So that might give Biden supporters hope. Also in Wisconsin, they're not expecting to get to counting all those mail-in ballots for hours still, and Democrats were expected to have a larger lead in those mail-in ballots. Again, what's kind of interesting, Rosie, is how this all sort of conflates with each other. The president has downplayed the coronavirus consistently throughout all this the last several months, and the reason why we have all these mail-in ballots is because of the coronavirus. So Trump and his supporters have also criticized downplayed mail-in balloting. I talked to one Trump supporter in Wisconsin who said she didn't even think mail-in ballots should be a thing. So this is how it all sort of conflates. And Wisconsin's Trump supporters will tell you they don't buy the poll numbers because they were wrong the last time. And likewise, they conflate that with the COVID numbers. They say we don't trust the COVID numbers either. We think COVID is overblown. The numbers are skewed. They're padded to make Trump look bad. A lot of people obviously might disagree with that, but that's how those Trump supporters view all of this. To not trust the data, not trust the numbers that come in. And Trump is really playing on that right now to tell them don't trust the numbers that might be coming in now after the election is sort of over. But of course, as we know, it's not over yet. And really in Wisconsin, for example, those numbers, we might not see those valid numbers coming in for hours yet, Rosie. So we'll have to keep on watching.
And we're in this cliffhanger state. Look, some of the claims that President Trump has made, what's been the reaction from Biden's camp? Because they knew that some of these legal challenges were almost inevitable if this was the type of situation we found ourselves in. How are they planning on responding?
Well, they have a team of lawyers ready to swoop in. You know, yesterday, for example, in Houston, Texas, Republicans were trying to get 127,000 votes in Houston, which is a strong Democratic stronghold, tossed out. Why? Because voters there were using a drive-through method to vote, which is happening all over the country. In fact, even I voted through drive-through. But Republicans wanted those votes tossed out. The state Supreme Court in Texas yesterday said, no, you can't throw those ballots out. These are the kind of legal issues that are going to be popping up in the next few days around the country, like little wildfires around the country. So both teams, both camps will have their lawyers who will swoop in to try to litigate these things before they go all the way to the Supreme Court, which we don't know how they would argue in some of these cases. You know, the Supreme Court did say that in Wisconsin you can't count mail-in ballots after Election Day, but the Supreme Court also said you could do that in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina. So when Trump talks about how these are not valid anymore, these ballots that are out there, it is his own Supreme Court that said, yes, in North Carolina, a battleground state, and in Pennsylvania, a battleground state, you got to keep counting these ballots for days after the election. So this thing really is far from being finished yet.
Thank you very much, Andy Roaston, our reporter there in Joe Biden's home state of Delaware. Well, let's get a little bit more outside perspective on the state of the race. We're joined now by Craig Peters, contributing editor at Quartz. Thank you very much for speaking to us. We've heard from President Donald Trump in the last hour with some extraordinary claims. What did you make of it? Were you predicting that sort of stance from the president?
Well, Rosie, you know, I've been a foreign correspondent my entire professional life, and I've reported this story before. I've heard this speech before. I've heard it in Russia. I've heard it in China. I've heard it in Turkey. I've heard it in Venezuela. And I've heard it in Cuba. I never thought I would hear it in the United States. Donald Trump is no longer an aspirational autocrat. He's the real deal. And if the audience would like to try and understand why Trumpism survives in 2020 America, the home of democracy, the reason is it's no longer a majority of level minds in America, but one where unbalanced enthusiasts survive. And that's the tragedy. Trump is successfully transforming America into a mediocre democracy, regardless of who ultimately wins the presidency.
Well, he hasn't done that just yet, but has said very clearly he wants the Supreme Court involved. There is, at this point, no evidence of foul play in the election whatsoever. What kind of scenarios do you see playing out in the next few days and the next few weeks in terms of legal challenges, and how might they impede the process?
Well, here's what we know for a fact, Rosie. We know that the Democrats have already mobilized 5,000 attorneys. They're about to be deployed. We also know that Donald Trump has stacked the Supreme Court. We know that Chief Justice John Roberts, who our audience may have heard of, he is a conservative and he often sides with liberals on social issues. But decisions that involve money in politics, he's a diehard Republican, and he always goes with Trump. And to understand Donald Trump, his thinking here, the thinking of an autocrat, you have to go back to the man who taught him everything he knows, the former attorney for Wisconsin red-biting Senator McCarthy, Joe McCarthy. There's a guy by the name of Roy Cohen. I urge the audience to look up the name Roy Cohen. Now, Roy Cohen taught Trump a valuable lesson. It's something he said to a colleague of mine many years ago in an interview. And Cohen said, I don't care what the law is, just tell me who the judge is. And what Trump has done is he has packed the Supreme Court with people who owe him favors. There is a quid pro quo there, whether one wants to argue differently or not. It does exist. And it's going to be a hard-fought battle in the Supreme Court. Whether it's just the Pennsylvania tally that goes to the Supreme Court, I don't think we can say right now. Georgia, it's really still too early in the game. But Trump wants to fight this. And there's one other important point here, Rosie. Democracy in America is argued on what we call the town square. And what we have here now are Trump and the Trump is coming to the town square with guns and ammo. His Proud Boys come out and support us. The Democrats come to the town square with lawyers and subpoenas. And it's going to be real interesting who is going to win this battle in the Supreme Court. Because what Trump is basically saying is, hey, even if you voted, we're not going to count it because I don't like the vote. But if I'm ahead in a state or look to be ahead like Arizona, it's okay. Count those votes, on the next day. And that dichotomy is percolating here. It's quite evident, and it's really concerning, Rosie. It should be concerning for the entire world, not just the United States.
Well, we were predicting there would be legal challenges of this kind, and that's already what both camps have sort of laid the groundwork to say that was going to happen. Thank you very much, Craig Peters, contributing editor at Courts. Appreciate your analysis. Well, if you've just joined us, let's remind you of where we currently stand. The Republican Party nominee, Donald Trump, has secured Texas, Ohio and Florida. The president's made a speech from the White House earlier this morning saying that tonight's results have been phenomenal. But he's made some unsubstantiated claims of widespread electoral fraud. Democrat Joe Biden believes he's on track to win the US election. Mr. Biden currently has an overall lead over Mr. Trump in vote projections and has flipped Arizona in his favor. Well, it will be easier to see what that looks like in our results hub. Let's head over there now to speak to Ollie. Ollie, who's got our live interactive map. Just explain to us the state of play. Where's red, where's blue, and what are those critical states that we haven't heard from yet?
Thanks, Rosie. Well, as things stand at the moment, Joe Biden has 238 of the 270 Electoral College votes that he needs to win in order to get the keys to the White House. Remember, 270, that all-magic number. Donald Trump is a little bit behind with 213. Now, that means that Donald Trump needs 57 Electoral College votes in order to be re-elected. The quickest way, we call these the path to 270, the quickest way for him to do that would be to take Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina and Pennsylvania. You can see how he's got a bit of a longer path to go through than what Joe Biden does. If we go to Joe Biden, you see here, we've got Michigan and Pennsylvania. Let's pull up the big map though, because there's other paths for both of the candidates, and actually Pennsylvania, everybody keeps on saying it's vital, but under our modelling, under what we're projecting, Pennsylvania might actually be the one that's needed to win. It could go to either party. So if we have a look here, if we take Michigan as well as Georgia, that's 16 votes in each one, 16 Electoral College votes. That gives you the 32 that is needed for Joe Biden to win. If we have a look for Mr. Trump, he could take Georgia, he could take North Carolina, he could also take Michigan and Wisconsin, and that will give him the 57 that he needs. So at the moment, there is multiple paths. We do not know whether we're going to get the results, though, for Wisconsin, Michigan, and for Pennsylvania. If it's going to come today, it might be delayed a few more days because we know that they're struggling there with the postal ballots. So there is a lot of work that's going through, and this could be one of the reasons, as we're hearing from our contributors there, that Donald Trump is threatening to take things to the Supreme Court, even though it would have to go to the state Supreme Court first, because there's so much uncertainty about those postal ballots and the likelihood that they're going to be Democrat. But at the moment, there are paths for both candidates. It's at the moment, we're in a waiting pattern, I suppose.
Ollie, there's 20 Electoral College votes up for grabs in Pennsylvania, currently held by the Republicans. I know you've just said there's different routes, but this could be one of the states that really helps swing it in favour of Joe Biden if he managed to clinch it back.
Yes, and that's because it's the biggest of the remaining that we've got. With 20 Electoral College votes, it only means that Joe Biden has got to pick up an additional 12 somewhere. He could do that with any combination. He could either take Georgia, he could take North Carolina, He could do it. You know, there's so many different paths for men. But if he didn't win Pennsylvania, or if the US president didn't win Pennsylvania, there are still alternative routes. So it might look like this is turning into a very, very tight race, that we're nearing the end of it, but you'd be mistaken, because there's still actually a lot of different avenues that both of the candidates can go down.
Ollie, thank you very much. It is complicated. We're in this sort of cliffhanger position, and in that different ways, that patchwork of states, it is still open for both candidates. Thank you very much, Ollie. Well, of course, this is all happening across the Atlantic, and Europe is watching and waiting to see what their relationship will be like with Washington. Of course, it is still all to play for. But let's go to Brussels to get the latest European reaction with our correspondent, Maeve McMahon. Maeve, it's all, as Ollie's just said, really in this state of flux. We don't know yet who will take the White House. How's it all playing out in Europe?
Well, it's still very much a waiting game here in Brussels, and as you can imagine, a rather nail-biting waiting game, because if many people here in Brussels, in the EU capital, could vote, you can be sure that they would be voting for Mr. Biden. During the last 4 years, many here that you speak to from the various EU institutions argue that Trump was a Eurosceptic, he was in favour of Brexit, he was in favour of breaking up the EU as he knows it, and they really want to see a change in the White House. But that said, we haven't heard from any official reactions from any of the institutions, and we won't perhaps for the next couple of days and weeks until there is a proper outcome to this result. We have been seeing a lot of tweeting, though, over the morning, especially among the European Press Corps and editors and journalists from all around the bloc, expressing really how concerned they are about the outcome of this election and how much at stake there is for Europe. We can bring up a tweet there from Lionel Barber. He's the former editor of the Financial Times, and his tweet really reflects the mood here in Brussels and what sources have been telling me on the phone off the record throughout the morning. He says Trump has not only declared victory prematurely and without any basis, he's engaging in the greatest voter suppression in history. Lionel Barber thinks a constitutional crisis is looming and Biden must respond, and so must the Republicans. But for more on Trump's speech and for the wider look at EU-US relations going forward, I'm joined now by Dr. Ian Lesser. He's the Vice President of the German Marshall Fund. He's based here in Brussels for about 9 years, and we're delighted to have you here this morning on Good Morning Europe. Ian, you were listening into that speech that Trump made earlier. It was very much expected that he was going to give an almost victory speech. What's your first reaction to that?
Well, this is really the scenario that many people had thought about and also feared, because if it's close, it allows all sorts of legal challenges to unfold, all sorts of political maneuvering to go on that could stretch this process out for days, for weeks, with a very uncertain outcome. And one way to sort of cue that up is to suggest that, the election was in the bag, that he'd really won, that anything that suggested otherwise was an attempt to manipulate the result, really to question the credibility of the outcome. Even an election he might feel he won.
So how should Europe be looking at all this, and how should Europe react over the next couple of days and weeks?
Well, I don't